odd to say happy to be with grief care, but it's just this weird thing. You all are such a family to me. I was speaking with Gail Jonas, who helped start work with grief care when it got started there, and will be your speaker next week. And I said, every time I go there, it's just like going home. It's like being with my people. So I'm always happy to be a part and so grateful that Cornerstone still reaches out to me and I still get to come here and do this. It's really, really valuable. It's still part of my own healing. It still keeps me thinking and talking and kind of forces me sometimes as I start to get away from those things, it kind of brings it back and helps me process even further some things. So I really, really appreciate being here. And as per usual, this has happened all the years in grief care. It's usually the night before, the day of. I'll have some ideas, what I want to say. Maybe I'll have some things written down. And usually God will just drop something in my heart the night before, the day of, because he knows what you need more than me just preparing a message. So tonight, I had all this crazy stuff happen at work right at 5 o'clock, and it made me so anxious. My heart is like, oh. And the Lord was like, you put that aside. This is grief care. And I walked up to my room and I heard him say, get down on your knees. So I got down on my knees and he goes, no, on your knees, but hands in the air. So I put my hands in the air. And immediately I saw this just giant box in my mind. I saw this giant box come down and land. And I was like, that's a big box. And he goes, well, there's a lot of grief. And I thought of that saying on the side of the box, that God has a hope and a healing for you on the side of there. And I said, well, what's in the box? And he said, well, something for everyone. And I don't mean that to mean that I have something that I'm going to say tonight that's for everyone, but I just mean that to say in my heart, what I took it is that God has thought of something for each and every one of you in your grief. For where you are and for what you need, he has something in mind for you. So for some of you who are here tonight, and there may be some parts of the group that are not here tonight, everybody has different kinds of losses. And what I say is we want to share, not compare, right? Grief means we're all grieving different kinds of things, and we can never try to compare it to someone else's loss. It's our own. I think of, I watched my cousin Brenda many years ago, kind of in the mid 2000s, die. I was with her when she died. She was raised like my sister, and she was 40 years old. She had 2 little kids. Her husband was with her, my mom and I were with her when she took her last breath. And I had a grief that has carried on. I still deeply miss her. And yet my grief was very different than her kids' grief and her husband's grief, but it didn't mean I didn't get to grieve too. So it's just a different relationship. He had to go home without his wife. The kids had to not have their mom. So the devastation to them was very different than it was for me, who I could go home to my home, but it still doesn't mean that I shouldn't grieve because mine is so different. My brother, I had an older brother who died about a year later, and I got to be with him. I don't know what it is. I'm with people the last week of their life, so don't invite me over. It's not a good sign. But my brother, I got to be with him the week before he died. He was 17 years older than me, so I didn't really grow up with him. But the last 5 years of his life, we formed a relationship. I'd go to Texas every year. I'd spend some time with him and really got to be close with him. And he passed away a few days after I left. And again, that's a different kind of grief because we had different moms. His mom's grief was very different than my grief. You know, we were much more distant growing up, but I still missed him. And I went through some definitely parts of the grief process in relationship to that, but it was really different. And his mom had to live in the same town and had many different things to overcome in her grief. A few years later, I lost a really good friend. We'd been friends for 20 years. For the last 5 or 6 years of his life, we lived right down the street from each other. His daughter always came over. We were the same age. He got a degenerative disease, and I think about, like, often I think about his mom, and my grief is different again than his mom's grief. But instead of, again, not comparing, but sharing, when I think of him all these years later, if something comes to mind about something silly or something fun or a good memory, I text it to her because I figure we need to share this together. Even though what she feels day to day is different than what I do, I think it's important that we share that. Um, and then in 2013, some of the folks here in the grief care group know I was already a part of grief care and a speaker and helping facilitate. My mom, in fact, came to grief care and watched me speak one night. And in 2013, she went from being really happy and healthy into the ICU and spent most of the next 7 months in the ICU. And I had just had a newborn infant. Um, and that was the first time her death, the day before she died, um, I remember leaning over her, and I would say that's the first time in my whole life, even though I'd had other losses and had other kinds of pains in my life, I would say that's the first time I could, when they talk about the word heartbreak, I think of that like you broke up with someone or there's this heartbreak, but this is the first time I felt a physical, like it felt like my heart tore in half. Like I could physically feel something go down the middle of my chest and just rip my heart in half. And it was a very different experience. That came with the full force of grief in my life, like crying everywhere, bawling, anger, uh, depression, sadness, overwhelm, loss of ability to concentrate. It just had an enormous amount of layers to it. And it took a very long time. I'm a long griever, so I'll never judge you for how long you grieve. I feel like I take longer than most because I just have a lot to process. And currently, as my dad is kind of entering the last part of his life, I'm anticipating, he was in the hospital this weekend and I was with him, but we determined that's the last time he'll be in the hospital. And we're getting hospice involved. He may, he may live for a while, but he's 87. He's had a full life. He's declining. And I kind of see grief coming for me again. And honestly, I don't know what it's going to look like this time. Even though I've been through it, I have no idea what I'm going to experience or what's going to come up for me this time. So there's going to be different things. So God has this awareness. I call him the great grief counselor, right? He has an awareness with every loss and kind of loss and where we're at. And so let's talk about the idea that we all need something different. We have some things that are shared, but each of you needs something different according to your kind of loss. Grief is really painful. It's beyond words. They have that idea where grief is this, I've talked about this before, where you stand back and they have those pictures of an iceberg and you think an iceberg is so big and you can see above the water, but then they'll have the underwater shot and you'll see that it's just ginormous underneath. And so much of grief doesn't have words, it isn't always something people can see that what's on the top sometimes, but there's a huge part of it that's unseen that happens in different parts of us and doesn't always have language and words. So it's a very painful process and it's unique to you, although we still share in it. And God has this idea of what it is you need right now. I remember when my mom died, God, one day, you guys have heard this because I'm sorry, I'm telling the same stories, but for those of you who are new, I was driving one day and he says he was going to be a mom to me. And this is, I'm going to be real honest. I've loved the Lord all my life. I still love him, but I was like, I don't want you to be my mom. I want my mom back. Like, you're not my mom. I don't want you to be my mom. But he started doing things for me that he knew I needed. And so I had a friend my mom sent me cards all the time. She loved cards. She sent everybody cards. She'd see something funny. She stockpiled cards just so she would have cards to send you. And a friend of mine just started sending me cards all the time in the mail. And her women's Bible study sent me cards on a regular basis. And because there's no real grandparents for my kids, and my dad wasn't that kind of a guy who's going to buy gifts for the kids. One of her friends that I had never met started sending my kids like Easter baskets and Christmas presents and Valentine's baskets. I mean, who does that? Like, where does that come from? And it would just overwhelm me because that's something my mom alone would do. And God put someone else in my life, and it didn't take it all away, but He did things for me that I wouldn't have even known to have asked for. He I'll always tell a story at another time, but there are times where He let me have my anger and left me alone because the Holy Spirit wanted to come close to me. I'm like, get away. Already I'm in too much pain, and He would back away and He would come back later. So He just waited it out with me. And there are times He also told me it's time to move on when I stayed somewhere way too long. And I don't mean if you're new to grief, this does not apply to you. You're in the first, year or so. I'm not going to say that any of this applies to you, but there's some times that we get stuck because David Kessler will talk that grief is like a river, right? It's taking you to where you need to go. And sometimes, the process is flowing along. Sometimes a log or a stick falls in and it carries on down the river, but sometimes a really big tree or something will get in there and it stops the flow and it forms an eddy. And that's when we get stuck in our grief. It's just kind of flowing and getting stuck. And there's times along it, grief can get really complicated because we can have multiple losses, but there's also grief just in itself easily gets complicated. We get trees in the way and our grief gets stuck. And God helped me at those times too, to just say, you're stuck. You don't have any room in your heart for your kids and the new things in your life because I'm just stuck on a story. And He would help me find a way to move on. And it was painful, but He would help me do it. So we all need something different. So let's talk about what might be in the box for you. So the great grief counselor, I'm going to talk as God tonight as the great grief counselor. He knows the depth of your pain. He really does. He knows your sorrow. For some of you, He knows about your anger. Others of you, He knows about your worry. There's some of you here tonight. Sorry, give me a minute. Sometimes these things overwhelm me a little bit. I think of you, some of you here tonight, God knows how you feel when you lay your head down at night to go to sleep. And maybe how you sleep or don't sleep, or have dreams or nightmares or other things that are really, making it hard for you at night. It's that feeling you wake up and you think it's all a dream, and then the reality of your day kind of sits back in. So He knows those parts of you. He knows the chaos. He knows the tragedy. He knows the loss of, dreams and experiences and shattered expectations and all kinds of those things that are really hard sometimes to put into words of what is happening to us. So this is why He's so good at this, because He can detail out some things for us we don't even know to ask for, right? Because it's the unseen stuff under the water sometimes that we don't know what to do with. We just know it's there. So what's He bringing you? God does this really weird thing. And I gotta say, I still don't understand it. I've been a part of grief care for a long time, and He gets really close to the brokenhearted. And the Bible tells us this, and we know this. We feel Him sometimes just come into grief care and He's just there. And I don't even still understand it. I can say I know it. I can say it's in the Bible, but it's really weird. When you get in a lot of pain, He just hones in on you and wants so deeply and badly to be a part of the pain with you. He put this mechanism in us, grief, to help us heal. So He gets close to us, and He also gave us an internal process to help us heal. And why does He do that? He comes and He wants to bring you comfort. And I think of the analogy of being sick. And I know this is a hard year to talk about being sick. So we've had a lot of people die from COVID and other things, and it's been really rough. But I'm thinking of those times where we used to have a cold or a flu and your immune system had to fight it out. You go to the doctor and there's like, well, you just got the cold, you got to go home and just rest and drink fluids and all that. And you'd be like, oh, could just give me something. Where's my Z-Pack? Where's my pill that's going to make me better? And I think of that is that in like grief, there's no pill for this. There's nothing that, it's a process, just like our immune system. We have a natural system to grieve so that we can get healing. But in the middle of all that, we all need some things that bring us comfort. So if you've been sick, your immune system has to do its thing, but you also need some things that bring you comfort. And I'm going to use this right here. This is, we all fight for this blanket in my house. It's like so soft and so wonderful. Everybody wants to be under it. So, when you have the chills or you're cold or you're miserable, it's so a warm bed, a nice blanket over you. It just brings you some comfort. It doesn't take it all away, but it does bring you some comfort, for some of the things you're experiencing. And so I think about what warms you in your grief, because it's a hard, painful process to go through. And sometimes you need some comfort too. Maybe you've comforted others, but you need some comfort too. So I'm thinking about what helps you. Is it a family member, a friend? Is there music? Is there something that brings you comfort? And maybe you don't even know what could bring you comfort. And that's okay too. If you know, great, then maybe there's some things you need to seek out and get connected to, but maybe you don't even know, but God knows some things. He has an idea of some things that can bring you comfort. Also think about when you're sick, and I'm a prop person. I can't help it. It happens every once in a while. Some of you who hate props, I'm so sorry. But next prop. I think of when you are not feeling well and there's a cup of soup, right? Or something that Cornerstone Grief Care folks have brought me food many times. I had a near fatal illness and they dropped by all kinds of food. Janet has picked up milk for my kids and brought me some groceries, and these guys have made me food and brought it to my house and cared for me when I wasn't well. And what a comfort to not have to get up and make something for other people to take care of you. And I think of soup when you're sick or have a cold, how it nourishes your body. You just feel better. And I just think of the things that God has for you that just to nourish your soul. Grief is so taxing on our soul. And I don't know exactly what I mean when I say that. We all talk about the soul and what it can mean and all of that, but I'm just talking about that inner part of us goes through so much suffering, and it's just really, really hard. And this stuff kind of comes along, and God has things that nourish us. Sometimes it's movies or flowers or music or art or walking in the woods or animals or your pet, or there's something there that brings you comfort. And nourishes your soul. And I don't know what that is for you. Mine's usually ice cream nourishes my soul, not soup. But there are things that God can bring into your life like that. And my other favorite one, my drug of choice, this or prednisone. I've only had prednisone twice, but it was amazing. So there are things also when you go through sickness, you can have headache and fever, and there are other things that make it really hard. And so sometimes God has some medicine for us. And again, it can be your medicine, might be some music. It might be being with friends, but there's something that helps you, because with grief, you get so physically tired and emotionally exhausted. You can get numb and forgetful and concentration problems and sleep problems. You feel overwhelmed. So there are things that are medicine for us that help us rest, that help us just be able to relax, that help us along the way with some of the things that we're experiencing. And one of the last things I think of, my last prop, if you can't stand props, I'm sorry, it's almost over. This is some essential oil I got from Pastor Josh, who was at Cornerstone. That's really old. It's getting a little kind of Well, that's going to kind of play into a story I'm going to tell right now. It makes me feel a lot more like my dad. I once had the really bad flu in my early 20s, and I remember being out at my mom came and got me and took me out to her house, and they just I mean, I love my husband. He can't hear this, but I love the man, but he is not, he will make sure the kids get in bed and the things are done, but he's not a like dote on you caretaker. Like, oh, are you warm enough? Can I get you something? He's not that guy. He's like, you okay? You gonna live? He might cook some dinner later. That's his style. Very good man, not knocking on him at all, but that's not his thing. But my mom was lovely and caring for people who were ill. She, in fact, cared for many people who were ill at the end of their lives. When everybody else left, she'd go get them and rescue them and take care of them. So I was laying on the couch or the recliner at my parents' house, and I'm in my early 20s, and my dad, who doesn't really know much about how to care for people who are sick, but he wanted to help, and he saw I was in pain. And let's just say they had that medicine cabinet where they never threw anything away ever. So it was always a mix of new stuff and things that had been there for like 20, 30 years. And this is the early 90s. And I see him come out of the bathroom toward me with like a Vicks vapor rub, but it's in an avocado green that's and an old label that says I'm from 1967 or 72. Pretty sure good at least 25 years old. And I see him and I can't move. I'm so sick. I see him reach his finger in there and he's just coming at me. And I'm like, oh no, I'm good. Up. And he just wiped it right underneath my nose and then just stuck some right here. And he's like, there, that ought to make you feel better. And I was like, oh God, I just been assaulted by 1960 something Vicks vapor rub of some sort. But sorry, that was a story just for fun. And now I realize that I have this very old bio. All of a sudden I have this realization that maybe I'm more like my dad than I thought. I'm pretty good about clearing things out, but I have these oils. So essential oils sometimes, or those kinds of things on our chest or that we breathe in, are things that can open us up. Again, they don't take away grief, but they can open us up. And I just thought, the best person for opening us up in our grief, and that doesn't mean that we're back to being ourselves and that we're open, but just to help us breathe again is the Holy Spirit. And I realize that we don't all know how to do that, and you don't have to know how to do it because God has it in the box for you. I remember feeling like the Holy Spirit coming next to me, and I was like feeling a comfort come in, and I pushed it away at times, to be honest. I didn't want it because I wanted to be left alone in my pain. But there are times he just waited out and come back in, and there were times I could just feel a comfort in my soul, and you can catch your breath for the first time. And so as God has some things for you, I want to give you a heads up also that sometimes comfort, like I just said, can be a hard thing to receive. God wants to get near us and there's these things for us, but why don't we want to always take it in? And there's some reasons. Sometimes it just really hurts. It puts us in touch with our pain. Sometimes we're really in that phase of being mad or angry. And if you are, cool, we're good with that. I learned how to be with angry people and then learned how to live with my own anger through grief care because they were like, you're okay. People are saying they hate God and they're mad at him, and they'd be like, grief care was always like, okay. And I learned what a really healing process that was to be able to have your grief and your anger and people around you to be okay with it. But it does make it hard sometimes to receive comfort because we're so angry. And sometimes we don't want to let other people in. It makes us vulnerable. It makes us feel all the loss more. So sometimes comfort's really, really hard one. Even though we think it's wonderful to, like, who doesn't want a blanket and some medicine and some soup? Sometimes we don't. Sometimes we're just trying to truck along and push through, and we don't want to stop and slow down for that kind of thing. But this is the cool thing. The Lord knows all that. And the great grief counselor knows where you're at tonight and what you need tonight and what you need tomorrow and what you need just sometimes just to make it hour by hour or minute by minute. And some of you are in those stretches where you're kind of trying to make it week by week or month by month. So everybody's kind of in a different time frame, in a different place. Maybe you have an idea of what you need. Maybe as we're talking tonight, you're like, you know what? I really kind of do know what I need. I need this. I need a friend, or I need a break, or I need some rest. And you kind of, sometimes you can only drink water and take a multivitamin. I mean, there's sometimes it's really basic, but there maybe some of you know what you need. And it's just like, I got to open myself up to that and say, God, okay. And some of you have no idea what you need. And if for those of you who are new to grief and this is just all going over your head, that's okay too. This may not be the night. We're just happy you came and you showed up and you're present. But tonight you're like, I can't even think about receiving anything or being in that place. And that's okay too. That's part of the grief process. See, almost everything in grief is normal. We don't want you to be suicidal, and we don't want you to hurt another person. And we don't want you to be so depressed that you can no longer do anything in your life ever again, or be that anxious or have so many traumatic, intrusive memories that it's overwhelming you. And those are the kinds of times you might need to see a counselor or talk to someone, for sure, if you're having suicidal or homicidal thoughts or something. But there's a whole range of things that happen to everybody in grief, and it's all normal. But maybe for those of you who are here tonight, some of you would say, I think I know something I might need, and I just need to open up to it a little bit. Some of you know what your need is, but it's not met yet. And some of you might be like, I don't even know what to ask for. What could I possibly ask for? This is just too painful and overwhelming. So I don't have that answer for you. But I met this God, a new part of him along my grief process that surprised me and helped me. Even when I didn't want help, or even when I wasn't ready for it, he waited me out until I was ready for it. Or he knew the process I was going through because he put it in me, just like my immune system. And he was good to be at peace with me while I waited for grief to kind of carry me along in the river to the point where I was ready for the next thing. So I just want to encourage you tonight about being ready for what, that God has something in the box for you. And it's very detailed and it's very specific and it fits just you and it doesn't fit other people because you need something unique. And a word of encouragement for those of you who are grieving multiple losses. Life has a way of doing that. Sometimes there's multiple deaths. Sometimes we've lost. I said this is really sad the other day because my dog has cancer and I've taken him for electrochemotherapy and I've done it. I've done these ridiculous long days in Dublin and driving back here and working. And, we got to the point where there's nothing else we can really do. And I walked out of work the other day. I said, God, just don't let my dog and my dad die at the same time. Whatever silly thing to say, because, a dog and my dad are not the same. But I was like, oh, I just don't want to have to grieve those two things at the same time. So you can have other kinds of losses in life. There's losses during COVID of our lives and our experiences. There's losses of loved ones. There may be a loss of a pet and a person, or a job and a dream and a person, or multiple people. So it's really, remember that river that gets like logs in it, that gets really complicated and things get stuck. So I would also say that maybe there's not just one thing in the box for you, that you may need something different for each grief. Maybe in one of them, you're this far along and this is what you need. You need something that nourishes your soul because it's been a long time. And another place, you're newer in the grief and you need some comfort, or they're just very different and they require different things of you. I love something David Kessler said. Also, he's a reader, writer, speaker, author for grief. He's not a Christian, so I don't love everything he has, but I love a lot of what he has. But one of the things that he talked about is giving each grief its due. So if you have multiple losses and it's all wrapped up in that tangled ball of emotions and you cannot figure it out, sometimes we have to take a day and say, on Saturday, I'm going to spend some time grieving my mom or my child or my family member or whatever this is. And on this day, I'm going to spend some time giving thought and process, or a walk, and whatever it is, a prayer, talk about another person or another kind of loss, and do a little bit. It doesn't mean that it all won't wrap together and that it won't be complicated, but it is helpful sometimes to pull a little bit of it apart and then look at what do I need here? And I need to spend some time just thinking about this loss. And then I need to spend some time thinking about that loss. And that's kind of helpful in grief to compartmentalize a little bit, um, to be able to figure out the different emotions that go with each thing. All right. So my final thoughts are God has something in the box for you. And it's something for your hope and your healing, which you often hear in grief care, which originated in grief care. And Gail may share that story with you next week. But he has something for you, just for you.